a lot of our volunteers are pretty representative of that list. There's people kind of from each of those tribes that are actively helping with the effort. And when I mean help, calling and texting folks who have signed up for our mailing list, and also people that are interested in advocating for the effort with our respective representatives.
Most pilots don't understand what career opportunities are available in the world of aviation. They're making career decisions based on advice from friends or posts on internet forums, meaning they're taking huge risks with their livelihood without having all the details. This podcast was created to help you understand the aviation industry so you can find your dream job. Let's get ready for Pushback. Here's your host and my dad, Nick Fialka.
Hey, pilot, how's it going? You've found another awesome interview edition with your host, Nick Fialka. That's me. I hope you're having an awesome day. I am certainly having a great day, and I am excited to tell you about Jeff Kerr. He is today's guest that we have, and he is the leader and the spearhead of American Airlines Pilots for ALPA. Now, this is a group, an organization that is looking to try to merge the Allied Pilots Association at American Airlines with the Airline Pilot Association International, which is the world's largest pilot union, like 67,000 something members. The reason I interviewed Jeff is, first off, I really believe in his cause. I really think he's doing an awesome thing, and it's a really great thing for my friends at American Airlines. Also, it is important to you. If you are working your way to a job that is going to be in the airlines, there's a huge likelihood that you are going to have interactions with a union. And it just goes to show Jeff's work. Jeff was like alone and unafraid. He's got a great pedigree and an awesome background, but he saw something that he thought needed to change, and he affected that. And you can affect that too. And that's the beauty of what a union does. Like, the beauty of it is the union represents the pilots, represents the group, represents the whole. So you can have a voice, and you should have a voice, and you should participate. They want to hear from you. Everybody I speak with from the unions are always clamoring to get more information and get more feedback from the members. So be a member that gives feedback, and think about that when it's your turn. When you get hired onto your airline and you are in a union, or there is a union in your organization, like, be a part of it. Reach out, volunteer. It's a great thing. I hope you really enjoy this, but before we get to the interview, two quick things. Number one, if you have a question for me, or you know of a cool guest that you think I should interview, send me an email, podcast@spitfireelite.com, and I'd love to hear from you. Number two, if you need a resume, you don't already have one, or maybe yours is kind of lame and cluttered, go over to my website, spitfireelite.com/podcast. I've got free resume templates right there. So they're designed for professional pilots. They're the ones we use at Spitfire, and they're awesome. So go get one. And last but not least, let's have a quick word from our sponsors, because without them, we wouldn't have this awesome podcast. Hey, pilot, it's Nick. I want to tell you about a great friend of the show, Timothy P. Pope. He's a financial planner, and he's completely focused on the professional pilot. He's the kind of guy you want to go to for real talk to help you figure out your financial future. With so many upgrades and so many transitions and so many things going on, you owe it to yourself to give him a call. He'll help you design and execute really smart financial planning strategies, whether it's retirement planning, investment management, military transition, tax planning. He's a great financial planning partner. Timothy P. Pope, CFP, helping professional pilots make the most out of life. Give him a shout. All the information's in the show notes. You should definitely tell him I told you to call. All right, pilot, I've got a really cool, special guest here today, friend Jeff Kerr. He is with American Airlines Pilots for ALPA. And this is going to be a really interesting look at all the different aspects of the union and kind of what is a complex situation, and we're going to break it down to help people understand what it's all about. So, Jeff, welcome. Thank you for joining us today.
Hey, thanks, Nick. And thanks for calling me cool. I think that you may be one of the first people that's ever done that in my lifetime. So thanks.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. Jeff has a really special role. He is leaning forward, heading up this program to essentially, American Airlines has a union. They're called APA, and the union is solely at American Airlines. And Jeff has started a grassroots effort to help them merge with ALPA, the Airline Pilot Association, which is the largest pilot association in the world. Jeff, can you kind of walk down the path of what this is all about and help somebody who's maybe at a regional and currently has ALPA, or maybe has another union or has no union, like understand what all of this, what your effort is all about?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Nick. Listen, AA Pilots for ALPA, it was founded on the premise that we think it's time for the American Airlines pilot group to have the opportunity to make an informed choice about how they're representing moving forward. And I was hired at American back in March of 2018 and got the opportunity to do some help at APA and help out with where they needed some support. And just quickly came to the conclusion that we do have, there's a lot of great things about APA, and we'd love to preserve all those good things, including the people that are volunteering for us, the people representing us, the people that are on the staff that are working on behalf of the pilots of American Airlines, and get the opportunity to merge APA with ALPA and create just a third kind of larger organization that combines the best aspects of both associations to both improve the representation of the American Airlines pilots and also improve the representation of all pilots that are currently under ALPA right now.
Yeah. And if you're at an airline or you're trying to make your way to the airlines and you've always heard things about unions and stuff like that, I think that it's important to point out that the entire idea of a union is to help the pilot group, to help propel the pilot's capability, their opportunity for earnings. And it's got a really long history. There's all sorts of great resources you can read about. But really, the whole point is the fact that a business is focused on business things. And one of the business things is profitability. And historically, with labor, when you look at companies with large groups of employees, sometimes in the past in American history, there have been times that the companies have not done things that are in the best interest of that employee group. And so the unions kind of came around as an answer to this to help fight for the rights of the employees. And that is really what happens today with maybe you're seeing things in the news about all these different airlines having negotiations and having contracts that are due for renegotiation and they're a few years old. I think these are all the union officials, the volunteers that are giving their time. They're also pilots on the line, but they're giving lots and lots and lots of their time to help better the pilot group, to help you be able to pay your bills at the end of the day, to help keep your kids' clothes on their back and food in their bellies, and also the quality of life things, whether or not you're on reserve for a long time or the amount of time off you have between trips and all sorts of crazy stuff. So the union's super duper important. And that's just like one tiny little aspect of it. Jeff is really pushing hard to help this alignment come together because ALPA's a big, big organization. It's the largest organization, pilot union in the world. And that brings being able to bring that, right? It brings other resources that are not available. So you're hired in 2018. You've seen it. Like, how did you kind of fall into this like leadership role? And really, how long have you been pushing for it? And have you started to get traction?
Yeah, thanks, Nick. I appreciate that. And before I jump into that background, one thing that really resonated that you just said is just generally like educating yourself on unions and why they exist, right? One thing that I managed to do when I was going through the hiring process is there's a couple of great books out there. One's called Hard Landing by Thomas Petzinger, which gives a pretty good, I think he's a Wall Street Journal journalist, basically a good history of the airline industry that takes you through the mid to late 90s and goes through the whole deregulation process and explains that. And it basically is a history of the airline industry. And then of course, ALPA's Flying the Lines, volumes 1 and 2 are both great resources as well to kind of take a look at union history. Because I've got a feeling a lot of the folks that were like myself coming out of the military probably aren't, unless they had a family member involved in a union, in a pilot's union, may not necessarily be as educated on why unions exist or why the airline pilots in particular have a union. And I think it's a good kind of way to learn that. But big picture, my takeaway, because I like to make things simple, is you've got the folks managing the airline and you've got a lot of pilots flying the airplanes. And as pilots, we're just trying to keep everybody as safe as possible and keep a safe operation going. And folks that are typically managing airlines have different risk profile because they're managing large fixed assets with a lot of debt. That creates a different kind of decision-making matrix. And the union kind of helps keep those two parties aligned so that everybody's interests are aligned in making a profitable business that also keeps everybody safe when they're operating out in the system. So sorry for the sidebar there.
Yeah, and I want to agree. Like Hard Landing, like great book. Hard Landing is an awesome book. You should absolutely read. It'll give you a lot of insight on the history. I think it was last published in the 90s.
Yeah.
And so there's obviously a lot that has come to pass from there, and they probably need to revisit it. But man, it just gives you so much good insight and like blows your mind about how all this was made. And if you want to listen to Flying the Line, you can straight up listen to it on a podcast.
Yeah.
There is an ALPA podcast called Flying the Line that you can listen to. And it's like the lady will sit there and read it to you page by page. It's an abridged version, but it's really, really good. That's what I'm doing. I've been listening to it and it's good to have out there. So highly recommend. All right. Now, off my soapbox.
No. So sorry to kind of derail that a little bit, but listen, to get back to your question is like, how did I get into this role? It was kind of just stumbled into it like most things so far with my aviation career. I was a Navy guy originally. When I got out of the Navy, I thought, okay, I was going to go work on Wall Street and do investment banking. So I did this investment banking internship, JP Morgan, doing mergers and acquisitions, and quickly realized that as worked as that was and as interesting as the people were that I was working with, like my mid to late, early mid 30s, not the best fit for somebody who's married. So quickly just pivoted back, talked to a lot of folks that I flew with in the Navy and got plugged in the interview process, got hired at American after taking a little bit of a touch and go at Republic Airlines. So fast forward, after being on property for a couple of years, we were kind of late 2020 after COVID stuff was starting to settle down, and I wanted to help out with the union. And I knew I had some financial background between the MBA and the Wall Street experience. And I was fortunate enough to work with my representatives in New York to get myself on the APA's Economic and Financial Analysis Committee. So helping the negotiating committee with costing valuation of contract proposals and also helping provide quarterly earnings summaries to the board of directors whenever American Airlines would have like a quarterly earnings call. And as I mentioned at the outset, one of the first things I realized, one of the things I kind of came to a conclusion pretty quickly after kind of working with the negotiating department at APA, working with the board and being a fly on the wall and just providing numbers to the board, is we've got a lot of great people working at APA, and there's a lot of talent in the building, and there's a lot of things that APA does well. However, after asking some folks who have been at ALPA carriers, at past carriers, realized that you could take that talent and give them access to ALPA's resources and their governance structure. And in my opinion, it completely changes how we are both seen by management and treated by management, and at the same time, the quality of representation that the end user, which is the line pilot, gets out of the product. And finally, I got the sense after talking with folks that I was flying the line with up in LaGuardia, who are mostly legacy American and TWA pilots based in New York City, there was definitely a desire to at least see what this looked like. So in other words, there's two ways to go to a new bargaining agent. You can either merge with another union, or you can do what's called a card drive, or a National Mediation Board showing of interest drive, which basically just kind of flips a light switch on overnight, go into another union. Whereas like a merger is like a transition period, keeps everybody in place through the transition period to get yourself to a new union, which is kind of like turning on a dimmer switch in a room. So realize that, everybody kind of understood, like if we were to do a card drive and go to ALPA tomorrow, everybody could kind of figure out what ALPA would look like, because ALPA's over there and APA is right here, and you would just join ALPA as it is. But if you merge with ALPA and you're growing their pilot group by 20% and you negotiate the terms of the entry, the end result's a different union than APA, and it's probably a different union than ALPA as it exists today. It's probably changes for the good for both the pilots of American and the pilots that are currently represented by ALPA.
Yeah, that's really interesting. You brought up some really good points. The first thing I think that is interesting to me is what you said about, there's a lot of talent at APA, at the American Airlines Union, and that the people work really hard to do a lot. And American Airlines is one of the largest corporations on the planet. And they have a lot of resources. They've got a lot of things going for them. And the APA union has all of its resources, all of its ability to pay its people and to get its, hire lawyers or whatever for whatever negotiating thing that needs to happen, or whatever avenue that they have. It's financially constrained by the amount of members that it has, right? It has a bucket of members that is the pilots at the company. And whereas ALPA,
yeah, that's right.
Right. They have a bucket of airlines across the nation that are lots of pilots, and they have massive resources. And so it increases the leverage of each individual pilot group to be able, you're going to negotiate a contract. They have lawyers, they have negotiators, they have economists, they have all the things there. You want to talk about medical stuff, right? They have the AMAS agreements and physicians on call 24 hours a day that can talk to you about your medical and, should I take this medicine or should I not do that? Or the fatigue committee and how they've got people at the ready, or the safety committee if you bend an aircraft and how to handle that. It's a huge behemoth that has a lot of benefits for the pilot group. That's a cool thing to see, and not taking away from all of the awesomeness that APA offers to the American pilots. But it's just interesting to kind of see both sides of that. And the idea of merging it in is really interesting because, I never thought about that as we have been talking. I never thought about kind of like, what are the terms for becoming a member group, right? Another airline. American's a huge pilot group, and so it's really going to boost the numbers at ALPA. And so there is definitely, like, walking that dog down the path, turning on that dimmer switch, I think is a really interesting thing. So you guys have been doing a lot. It's been a lot of grassroots structure. I got my lanyard in the other room.
Oh,
it's totally awesome. Thanks for sending it over. Rock and roll. All right. So before the AIP, the agreement in principle, came out at American, there was a survey done. So can you talk to us about what the survey was all about? And then as we talk about kind of the agreement in principle and some other like union-y terms, can you just explain those to the pilot? Because some people may or may not be familiar with that.
Sure. And actually, Nick, one thing, why don't we just take it a step back before we get to the survey? Do you mind if I describe the organization real quick?
Yeah.
Because it probably helps set the stage a little bit with like the survey results and like how that came about.
Perfect.
Okay, cool. As I said, just came to the conclusion, hey, you can go ALPA via merger or car drive. I actually started reaching out to other American pilots who had been under ALPA and found several folks who actually had significant organizing experience at ALPA. And 3 of them that I'm working very closely with actually helped facilitate mergers between the Continental pilots and the FedEx pilots returning to ALPA back in like the early 2000s. And they've been invaluable resources. And we've also had, what I've been finding has been very encouraging is there's kind of, right now there's basically, when I took a step back and looked at our demographics, there's basically like 10 different tribes of pilots on the property, between legacy American pilots, folks coming from TWA, folks coming from US Air East, folks coming from America West, folks flowing from Envoy or Eagle, or people coming from Piedmont, people coming from PSA, people hired off the street, people hired at US Air after the East-West merger. There's a lot of different tribes, for lack of a better word, that are on the property. And a lot of times it's hard to get everybody on the same page. But what I've noticed, and what we've noticed, is that when we started getting this effort together, a lot of our volunteers are pretty representative of that list. There's people kind of from each of those tribes that are actively helping with the effort. And when I mean help, calling and texting folks who have signed up for our mailing list, and also people that are interested in advocating for the effort with our respective representatives. And early on, we were lucky enough to get in touch with, basically influence the process where a resolution was presented back to the APA Board of Directors, which is all the 20 of the representatives of the organization, to vote in July on whether or not to initiate formal merger discussions with ALPA, between APA and ALPA. There was a pretty good debate on that. It took a couple months. The end result was basically the board of directors elected to do a survey of the membership just to gauge what the interest level was across the membership and actually seeing APA pursue this path, with the knowledge that we are in the middle of negotiating a contract and we feel like we've been close to getting there for a while. So they wanted to make sure that, one, the pilot group thought this was a priority, and two, get an assessment of, making sure that this wasn't going to interfere with our contract process if they were to go down this road, which brings us out to the point where we're having survey results in hand and moving forward in the process. Any questions on that?
What'd you learn from that survey?
Yeah, so the survey basically asked a very straightforward question, which was, hey, are you interested in seeing the board of directors see what a merger between APA and ALPA looks like? And they had a pretty significant participation level in the survey. I think something like 55% of the pilot group responded, which on the face of it doesn't always press people that much. But when you think of it in terms of that was about the same participation level rate we had with our last couple contract surveys, that tells you that the interest level in this is about the same as the pilot group has in getting a new contract, which, every single pilot that's flying out the line, I would imagine, is generally interested in their pay, working conditions, and benefits. The encouraging thing was that demographically across the board, the conclusion was 2/3 of the pilot group wants to see what a merger agreement looks like between APA and ALPA. There was only, I think, 18% that were just vehemently opposed and said, hey, no, I don't even want to spend my time looking at this. And the rest are in the middle of either kind of slightly opposed to middle of the road. And to top all that off, that survey was conducted prior to the recent contract proposal that was about to get put out in front of the pilot group and generally kind of reset our contract negotiations a little bit. And I'm not really in the position to speak to where our contract talks are going or anything like that. But bottom line is the only kind of age demographic that seemed somewhat reticent, right? So an American Airlines pilot below the age of 60, it was 75+%. That demographic was very interested in seeing process move forward. And I think it was only 58% of those who were 60 and older, right? Our assessment is that interest level has shifted as things have changed the negotiating environment over the past 6-7 months. Once again, not necessarily making a comment either way on the contract or what's going on globally with the industry in terms of negotiating contracts, but it seems like, just based on what we've seen with our mailing list growth since that survey was posted, that the interest level has only grown and we've gotten more interest in people helping and volunteering for the effort.
Yeah, this snapshot of time in the aviation industry is so fascinating because there's so many things going on. All the major carriers are up for contract negotiations. There's, there are highs and lows in the whole thing. And so it's a difficult time. I would say that I have worked in unions, I have volunteered and done all the things, and I've done surveys, all of that. And what I've seen, my experience has been, you put a survey out there, if you getting 20% of the pilot group to respond to a survey is a huge, massive undertaking. So getting almost 60% to link up, that's insane. When you look at Alaska, when they did their strike authorization vote, it was 90 something percent of the pilot group. And so that just told you for sure those pilots were ready for a contract, and they were serious about it. And it helped them get that great leverage, and they approved their TA and all those good things. So the more involvement, so if you're a pilot and you are headed that way, you're going towards American, you're going toward another major, being informed and being involved is only going to do good things for you. It's only going to be beneficial for your career and for your family. So I highly recommend doing that. The resolution that was passed, right? Talk to the resolution and what's going forward and kind of like putting all those pieces together.
Yeah, absolutely. So back in November is when APA Board of Directors was debriefed on the survey, showing that 2/3 of the pilot group wants to see what a merger agreement looks like. So they took the first step, putting together a committee that is tasked with looking at some kind of due diligence type questions that the board has some questions over. And a lot of them, to be honest with you, could probably be addressed just by looking at our website. If you go to APA-Pilots, like the number 4 alpa.info, there's a plethora of articles we put together since March of 22 that start either compare APA to ALPA in terms of resources or answer a lot of questions. But this committee is going to actually engage directly with ALPA and find out some of these questions that board members have. Because if you walk around our representation table, if you will, like the 20 board members who are currently representing the American Airlines pilots, there are several of them that have had experience being at ALPA carriers, but there are several that have not. And the ones that were at ALPA carriers, a lot of them, it's been several years, not longer, since they were under ALPA. So I think some of the questions that they're asking are either have to do with just wanting to make sure they're giving their members the full information available, and also, updating themselves on where ALPA is today. The next step, that committee's been appointed and fully formed. That committee is tasked by the spring board of directors meeting, which should be the first couple weeks of May, presenting those findings and recommendations to the board. And then the board must immediately then vote on whether or not to actually, basically a merger negotiation committee, the APA to ALPA merger negotiating committee, that will actually go out and negotiate a merger agreement between APA and ALPA. That committee would then present to our board and the pilots of American Airlines for consideration. That would potentially merge APA and ALPA together.
Got it. So right now we're answering questions. In May, that will be presented to the executive committee, and they'll vote on whether or not to kind of keep the ball rolling, keep things moving forward. If they do vote to do that, the board will be established, like a merger board will be established, and then it will come to all the puzzle pieces will be put into one big puzzle, and they'll present it. And once it's presented, if the executive council likes it, they'll vote on whether or not to send it to the pilot group, and the pilot group will have the final say. Is that kind of how it goes?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And a couple things to keep in mind, because I know there's a lot of folks that are engaged in our mailing list. They're frustrated by this is taking too long, or just taking a step back and looking at the big picture for any merger process, whatever, whether it be unions or companies or anything. First thing that needs to do is that the two sides need to start talking together, right? And then there needs to be a series of due diligence done between both sides to figure out what value each side brings to the table in a merger, right? And then once they figure out what the numbers are and they do their due diligence, then they can actually negotiate the terms. And the negotiation's usually relatively straightforward and quick once you have the information and the numbers in front of you. And then once the negotiation's completed, you need to actually execute and ratify said agreement, either through a couple companies, it's probably their boards of directors, and here at a union, it's democratic organization. So it's going to ultimately be up to the membership on what their representation looks like moving forward. So all that to say is that this is the first couple steps in the merger process, and the negotiation is just a part of that process that hopefully can get initiated in the spring.
Yeah, absolutely. All it takes is for somebody to think back to what happened in summer of 2022, where Frontier and JetBlue and Spirit started going through a battle royale about who's going to merge with who. And Spirit finally said, hey, we're going to JetBlue. Well, that was in the summer of 2022. And what have we heard from that? Probably not much by the time this airs, because it is closed door negotiation. It's a lot of moving parts. It's lots of things. It's lawyers, it's agreements, it's back and forth. It's a slow train. And so that's going to happen when it's going to happen. Same thing with how many pilots at American Airlines?
We've got around 15,000 pilots here at American.
15,000 freaking pilots.
Yeah.
That's a lot. And there's over 60,000. I know the people at ALPA are like rolling over and like cursing me for not knowing exactly how many pilots, but like, yeah, there's a ton. It's a huge thing. So that is, you've got to do it right too, right? Like the due diligence, the importance to do it right and to bring it forward so that at the end of the day, you don't regret it. That you are, if the pilot group votes to approve this, like you want everybody at the end of the day to high five and be like, that was a great choice. We've got so many extra good things, right? So,
yeah. And to your point earlier about, the Alaska strike vote and talking about like unifying events, right? If you go back and look at like FedEx, when they merged into ALPA, they negotiated their merger agreement right as they were about to open up for Section 6. And while they were in that merger negotiation, they actually got access to a lot of resources at ALPA, such as negotiating attorneys and economic financial analysis department support. So the same lawyers and finance guys that are working on every other ALPA carrier's contracts were helping them, right? And then to your point, they put out the education campaign that went along with that merger agreement. And as a result, I think the merger agreement vote, I think it was like 95% of their pilot group voted on that merger agreement. And it was like 95 plus percent favorable right as they were going into negotiations, right? So talk about like a unifying event that helps your negotiating process, and you don't even necessarily, you can start getting some of the benefits there just by going to the next step, which is starting the negotiation process, right? So it's definitely a great opportunity for the American pilots, and I think it's a great opportunity for ALPA too, because it ultimately helps our efforts at the negotiating table, and it also adds the voice of the largest pilot group to the world's largest pilot union.
Yeah. And I think I want to bring this point up too, is the fact that the pilot that's listening to this right now, whether you're at American or you're not and you're on your way, we live in a really unique time in history where there is massive turnover. All the great pilots plowed the way for us. Lots of them are retiring and hitting that age 65, and they're turning over. And as they turn over, there's a lot of knowledge lost from what happened to FedEx and what happened to, UPS and what happened to the history of this negotiation or that negotiation or how we lost it. When I was at my regional, right, the regional turnover was so vast and so great. We really had to look back and reach out to people that were no longer in the organization because we had lost that tribal knowledge. And so you need to educate yourself on the shoulders that you're standing on, because if you don't, you will be disadvantaged, because I can tell you that the leadership of these companies, they've been there and they know, and they've got that tribal knowledge. But the turnover that's happening in the pilot group, like there's great risk there. So being involved, knowing the history is important, because that's your leverage. So don't miss out on that. If he was talking about FedEx, Jeff's talking about FedEx, and you're like, what the hell is he talking about? I thought FedEx was always ALPA. Like straight up, like this is why it's important to educate yourself and what it's all about. Clearly he's done a lot of, Jeff's not 75 years old, right? How old are you, man?
38.
38.
Yeah.
So, I mean, he's like right in that zone. And so getting that knowledge is important. So off my soapbox, right?
Yeah, thanks. And it actually dovetails nicely into another reason like why we're doing this, right? Which is the management teams running airlines are constrained by antitrust law, right? There's only a certain amount of they are coordinating. I mean, in terms of labor, they have what's called Airlines for America, which is a airline advocacy organization that's usually run by airline management teams. But it's going to be difficult, short of becoming a public utility and re-regulating the industry, having them all under one umbrella and having complete control over our contracts, right? But labor, we don't have those antitrust issues to deal with. So we can pool our resources together and be unified, moving in lockstep to improve representation, our lot at our own companies and our lot as a profession as a whole moving forward. So generally, I think this would be a huge, huge help for the pilots of American to improve their representation. But I think if you're an ALPA pilot too, this improves everybody's situation, because you just add to that pool, that resource pool, to improve the profession as a whole, and just increases our level of communication in the era of what they call pattern bargaining, where you're kind of building on successes. So Delta just had the outline of a great AIP that they're about to go out and have their pilot group, or an agreement in principle or contract that they're going to have their pilot group vote on soon. And that will lend itself to other pilot groups making gains off of that. But if we're all under the same umbrella, it's easier for when you're having the same staff that worked on separate deals, having credibility to stand in front of your airline CEO and tell them, hey, this is how your competitors' CEOs think about labor costs, and be able to make that argument at the table and make some win-win gains for everybody.
Yeah, there are highs and there are lows in this industry, and you pick up that book Hard Landing and you'll read all about them. And right now, labor is on the uphill part of this, on the upswing. And at some point, the industry will change. Like when COVID happened, everything came to a screeching halt. All negotiations stopped. Like everybody was like, all of a sudden, we're worried about furloughs. Like, and it's going to happen. When the music stops, where are you going to be? So get as far as you can before that music stops. Jeff, man, thank you so much for spending time with us. Thank you for just laying all this out. I'm excited to get this out there. So if people want to find out more, or they want to get involved, or they want to they want to yell at you in a really angry voice, or they want to applaud you and tell you you're awesome, how do they reach out?
Yeah, if you go to our website, which is www.AAPilots4ALPA, it's the number 4, number 4, not the words 4, .info. We've got a lot of good information in there that gives contact information, gives you a means to donate to the effort, gives you a way to get involved, and just gives you information, because we're trying to give as much information out to the pilot group as possible, so that when they have the opportunity at some point this year to make a choice, it's an informed choice and what they're doing with their eyes open. On that same note, if anybody wants to get involved, you can email at info@aapilots4alpa.info. We're happy to get you plugged in, because we've got plenty of volunteers working at every domicile in our system. And finally, there's some elections coming up for the board of directors, and those new board members are probably going to be voting on whether or not thing moves forward come the springtime. So if you're a Boston pilot, Chicago pilot, or LA pilot, definitely stay engaged. Our website will start giving candidate positions here in the next couple months, and highly recommend you just stay engaged with the process. Make sure you vote according to what you desire to see happen.
Yeah, vote. Get out there and put your voice forward, for sure. I will have all of Jeff's contact information and AA Pilots for ALPA. I'll have all that in the show notes, so you'll just be one click away. You get in there, get on the mailing list, donate, go Venmo them a couple bucks. Don't be cheap. Let's go and help them out. It's a really great organization. I'm super glad that I got hooked up with you, Jeff, and thank you. I know we have been trying to record this thing for months, and this guy is so busy, and he finally carved out. He's like, you got 40 minutes, go. I was like, dude, thanks. Let's go. So thank you for finding time for us and pouring out and giving us all this value. It's so good, man. Thank you so much, Jeff.
Thanks, Nick. Appreciate the time.
All right, man. Have an awesome day.
You too.
Hey, before you jump out of here and go on to the next podcast, can I ask a big favor? Would you mind going over to your app that you're listening to this podcast on and give me a review? Give me a 5-star review if you love it. Give me a 1-star review if it totally sucks. Put a comment in there, something that is helpful. It helps me. It helps get the word out there. It helps people find the podcast, and that's super cool. If you don't do that, maybe you could just share the podcast with a friend. Tell a buddy who's trying to figure it out, trying to sort out this pilot dream of theirs and get a little bit further. That is super awesome as well. Last, if you don't do either of those two things, how about this? Find a way today to make yourself 1% better. Do that thing that you've been putting off. Put your foot forward, make movement, get yourself going, get that inertia that you need to succeed in this industry. So that's your choice. Leave a review, tell a friend, or make yourself better. Either way, it's all a good choice. And I'm super stoked you're listening, and I will see you on the next episode. The statements made on this show are my own opinions and do not reflect, nor are they under any direction from my employer.